The worst part wasn't finding them together. The worst part was sitting across from my mother 3 days later and watching her choose my best friend over me. I need to back up. My name is Harlow. I'm 31 years old. I work as a forensic accountant for a mid-size firm in Calgary. I trace money for a living, find the numbers that don't add up, follow threads that people think they've hidden. It's detail work, patient work. You learn to stay calm when everything inside you wants to explode, because the moment you lose your head, you lose the thread. That skill probably saved me. Or at least, it saved me from doing something I'd regret. My best friend since we were 14 years old. I'll call him my best friend because that's what he was. Or what I thought he was. His name is Dex. We grew up on the same street in Red Deer. We played junior hockey together, bombed through high school together, moved to Calgary 6 months apart when we were both 24. He's the kind of guy who remembers your coffee order and shows up when your dad's in the hospital at 2 in the morning. Or at least, he used to be. My girlfriend of 4 years. I'll call her my girlfriend. Because that's still how I think of her when I'm not careful. Her name is Ren. We met at a work function. She was doing event catering at the time. We ended up talking in the parking lot for 2 hours, after everyone else had gone home. She's funny, she's sharp. She does this thing where she tilts her head slightly when she's thinking through a problem, like she's physically trying to orient herself toward the answer. I love that about her. I loved a lot of things about her. They met through me. Of course they did. I introduced them at a birthday party at my place. My 31st actually, and they got along fine, which I was glad about. She laughed at his jokes. He liked her cooking. At Christmas, we all went to Banff together, me and Ren and Dex and a few other friends, and I have a photo from that trip of the three of us by the frozen lake. And we're all grinning, and I look like the happiest person in the world. I keep trying to remember if there was a moment. Some look between them I missed. Some silence that went on a beat too long. I've gone back through everything. The way memory does when it's trying to make sense of what happened, and I still can't find it. Which tells me either I was blind, or they were genuinely that careful, or both. I found out on a Tuesday. I came home early from work. We didn't live together officially. We were talking about it. We'd been talking about it for about 6 months. Looking at places, having this conversation about what the next step looked like. She had a key to my apartment. She used it sometimes when she came to cook dinner before I got home. Or when she wanted to work from my place because her building's internet was unreliable. I walked in just after 4 o'clock. My key turned in the lock the same as always. I pushed open the door and I heard something and I stopped. I stood in my own entryway for about 10 seconds, and I understood, in that 10 seconds, exactly what I was hearing. I didn't throw open the door. I didn't say anything. I set my bag down on the floor, very slowly. And I stood there, and I listened to the sound of my own apartment and I thought, okay, this is what's happening. This is real. What are you going to do? I walked to the kitchen. I poured a glass of water. I drank it standing at the counter. And then I picked up my bag and I left. I sat in my car for 45 minutes. I called no one. I just sat there in the parkade with the engine running and the heat on because it was February in Calgary. In February is no place to fall apart without your coat on. I watched my own hands on the steering wheel. I thought about every number I'd ever traced, every transaction someone thought was hidden, every lie that unraveled because someone left a small detail unchecked. Then I drove to a hotel, checked in for 3 nights, and texted Ren. I need some space. I'll be in touch, she replied within 2 minutes. Is everything okay? I didn't answer that. Here's something people don't tell you about betrayal. The acute grief doesn't come right away. There's this window, sometimes hours, sometimes days, where you function on a kind of cold clarity that feels almost like peace. You move through it. You make decisions. You're rational in a way that would probably frighten the people who love you if they could see it. That window was useful. I spent the next 48 hours doing 2 things. First, I started going through the small things, receipts, timestamps, the location data on my phone. From shared locations I'd set up with Ren for safety when she walked home at night. Not because I wanted evidence, because I needed to understand how long. I needed the timeline. It was 7 months. 7 months of my best friend coming over for dinner, watching hockey with me, asking how work was going, telling me he was stressed about a project at his job. And all of that was real, and was also happening alongside this other thing I didn't know about. 7 months of Ren telling me she loved me and meaning it, I think, on some level that I still don't fully understand. And also doing this. Second thing I did, I transferred my share of the joint account I had with Ren. We'd opened one to cover shared expenses when we started talking about moving into my personal account. It wasn't a huge dollars, about $200. Half of it was mine. I took my half, I did it cleanly, I transferred it through the app, I didn't touch a dollar that wasn't mine. I'm telling you this because people always ask about the money. So I want to be clear, I took exactly my half. Not more. On the 3rd day I called Ren and told her we needed to talk in person. She came to the hotel. When she walked in and saw where I was staying, I watched her face change. She knew immediately. The conversation was short. I told her what I'd seen. I told her I knew about the timeline. I told her I wasn't angry. And I meant that, in the way you can mean something, and also have it be the most devastating sentence you've ever said out loud. She cried. She apologized. She said it started as nothing. It was a mistake. She didn't know how to stop it. She was sorry. She was so sorry. She reached for my hand and I moved my hand away, not dramatically, just moved it to the other side of the table. I asked her to give me back my key. She did. I asked her not to contact me for a while. She said okay. That was it, Dex. I didn't call. I texted him one line, I know, don't contact me. He didn't reply for 6 hours. Then he sent a paragraph. He was sorry. He didn't know how it happened. He hated himself. I was his best friend and he'd destroyed it. Please call him. I read it. I put the phone face down on the bed and I went to sleep. Here's where it gets harder. My mother has known Dex since he was 14 years old. She fed him dinner 2 or 3 times a week when we were teenagers because his home life was messy. And my mother is the kind of woman who believes in keeping the door open. She loves him. She has always loved him in the way you love someone else's kid, who became part of the furniture of your life. I told her what happened. I drove out to Red Deer that weekend, sat down at her kitchen table. The same table where Dex had eaten probably 1,000 meals, and I told her everything. She listened. She was quiet. She asked a few clarifying questions. And then she said, Dex has had a really hard year. I looked at her. His contract got extended, she said. He's been under a lot of pressure. And you know how he is. He doesn't handle stress well. He never has. This doesn't make it right, but. Mom, I said. But he loves you. He genuinely loves you. And I think if you two just sat down and talked. I said her name again. Mom. Stop, did you hear what I told you? She looked at me with the expression I had seen my whole life. The one that meant she was about to reframe something uncomfortable into something manageable. I heard you. I'm just saying that people make mistakes. And you've been friends since you were boys. I drove home to Calgary that night. I didn't call her for 2 weeks. My cousin reached out the week after. He's 4 years older than me, works up in Fort McMurray. We've always been close the way. You're close with a cousin you only see a few times a year, but who you'd call in an emergency. He said he'd heard what happened and he was sorry. Then he said, your mom's pretty upset that you're not talking to her. She feels like you're punishing her. I said, I'm not punishing anyone. I'm just not ready to talk. He said, Dex called her, you know, he's devastated. I said, I know who Dex called. There was a pause. Then he said, I just think family is important. I said, yeah, I think so too. And I hung up. My mother called on a Sunday 3 weeks in. She'd heard through the family, the way things travel in families, through cousins and aunts, and the group chat that I'd been quietly dormant on for a month, that I wasn't doing well. She said she wanted to make sure I was okay. She said she'd been thinking about what I'd told her, and she felt terrible for how she'd responded. I thought, here it is. Here's the moment. Then she said, Dex asked if I'd talk to you on his behalf. He really wants to repair things with you. I said, Mom, stop. She did. I said, I need to ask you something and I need you to answer honestly. When I came to you and told you what happened, before you said anything about Dex's work stress, before you said anything about him loving me, did you say I'm sorry this happened to you? There was a silence. I'm asking because I don't think you did, I said. And I've been trying to figure out if I missed it. But I don't think I did, she said quietly. I may not have said it in those exact words. Okay, I said. Harlow. I'm not ready to talk yet, I said. I'll let you know when I am. I want to be accurate here. I don't think my mother is a bad person. I don't think she sat down and made a decision to choose Dex over me. I think what happened is more complicated. And in some ways harder to hold on to. I think she loved him. And she couldn't sit with the version of him that did this, so she started looking for the version that still made sense. And the way to do that was to make what happened a thing that could be understood, contextualized, eventually forgiven. And the only way to do that was to move the conversation away from me and toward him. I think she didn't realize she was doing it. That's the worst part. If she'd been cruel about it, it would be easier to be angry. Around this time I started paying attention to some practical things. My lease was up in March. I'd been planning to use the end of the lease as the natural moment to move in with Ren. We'd been looking at places in Beltline. Had actually done 3 walkthroughs. Had a short list of 2 units. That plan was obviously gone. But the lease being up was still true. I'd been living below my means for years. Forensic accounting pays decently and I don't spend a lot. I had about 68,000 STPs in savings, not counting my RRSP contributions. I'd been thinking about buying. Calgary's market had been doing things that made people nervous. But there were still entry-level condos in the right neighborhoods if you were patient. I started being patient. I also started talking to a lawyer. Not because I was planning to do anything dramatic. Partly it was professional habit. When something has gone wrong, you want to understand the structure before you act. Partly it was that I had a feeling things were going to get messier before they got cleaner. And I wanted to understand where I stood. The lawyer told me about a few things I hadn't thought about. The joint account was clean. I'd taken my half, nothing actionable there. But Ren had a few personal items at my apartment that she'd never picked up, including a fairly expensive stand mixer she'd bought with money from a work bonus, and kept at my place because her kitchen was small. I texted her about it. She came by on a day when I was at work and let herself in with. And this is the part I'd forgotten until I went to check. A second key she'd had cut the previous summer without mentioning it. I changed the locks that week. Not dramatically. Just as a practical matter, the same way you change your passwords after a security incident. By April I was in a new place. I found a 2-bedroom in Kensington. Older building, good bones, rent I could afford comfortably on my own. I'd taken my name off the short list of joint apartment viewings we'd had scheduled, which was a small administrative thing that felt enormous when I did it. I had not spoken to Dex in 11 weeks. He texted periodically. Not constantly, I'll give him that. He wasn't flooding my phone. But every couple of weeks there'd be something. I hope you're doing okay. I just wanted to say I'm still really sorry. Once, on a Saturday afternoon, watching the Flames game, keeps making me think of you. I miss you, man. I read them all. I didn't respond to any of them. What I did do, in early May, was reach out to the 3 mutual friends we had who worked in the same general professional network. Calgary's actually quite small. In certain industries you cross paths constantly. And had a quiet, factual conversation with each of them. Not a campaign. Not a story I was pushing. Just the truth, clearly stated, when the moment came up naturally. I owed them that, I thought. Because they were going to encounter this situation eventually, and I didn't want them to be blindsided. All 3 of them called me back within the week. All 3 of them were angry on my behalf. One of them had been considering bringing Dex into a project and decided against it. That wasn't something I asked for. But it happened. Dex texted me about it in June. The message was longer than usual. He said he understood I was hurting, but that what I was doing was affecting his professional reputation, and he didn't think that was fair. He said he'd made a mistake and he was trying to move forward. He said he hoped I wasn't going to let this define our entire friendship. I read that text 3 times. Then I wrote back for the first time in 4 months. I said, I didn't tell anyone anything that wasn't true. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't campaign. I answered direct questions, honestly. If that's affected your professional reputation, that's a consequence of a decision you made, not something I did to you. I wish you well. Please don't contact me again. He replied immediately. This is so unfair. I put my phone in my desk drawer and went for a walk along the river. That fall, I got a call from my aunt. My mother's younger sister. Who lives in Lethbridge, and who I've always been closer to than most of the extended family. She said she'd heard bits and pieces, and she wanted to hear it from me directly. I told her. She listened without interrupting, which is not something everyone in my family does. When I finished, she said, I'm so sorry, Harlow. That's a devastating thing to go through. And I'm sorry you didn't get better support when you first needed it. I actually had to put the phone down for a second when she said that. Not because it undid anything. But because I hadn't realized how much I'd been waiting for someone to just say that. She said she didn't think my mother was a bad person either, and I agreed with her on that. She said she thought my mother had some patterns around conflict that went back a long way. Ways of smoothing things over that came from her own upbringing. And that this wasn't the first time those patterns had come at us. She said she wasn't going to tell me what to do. She just wanted me to know she was in my corner. We've talked almost every week since then. Somewhere in all of this, I started doing other things. I got back into hockey, recreational league. Nothing serious, just a way to move my body and not think about the thread for an hour at a time. I started cooking more, which sounds small, but Ren had always been the one who cooked when we were together and I'd let that skill atrophy in myself. And there was something quietly important about reclaiming it. I went to Banff in November by myself, and I walked around the lake where that photo was taken, and I didn't feel as bad as I expected to. My mother and I have resumed contact. Slowly, carefully. She did eventually say she was sorry, genuinely, without conditions, without pivoting to Dex's perspective. She said she'd handled it badly and she knew it. I believed her. I also know that things changed for us in that conversation. And that some of what changed is permanent, and that she knows that too. We don't talk about Dex. I don't ask if she's still in contact with him and she doesn't tell me. I heard from someone in the mutual network that Ren and Dex are not together. Apparently whatever it was they had didn't survive being something they'd actually have to own publicly. I'm not surprised. I'm not happy about it either. Exactly. I'm mostly just detached from it in a way I didn't expect. Someone asked me a while back if I regret not confronting them. Not going back in and saying something in the moment. And I've thought about that question a lot. I don't. Here's why. I knew. Standing in that entryway with my hand still on the door. That whatever I said in that moment was going to be the thing I led with for the rest of my life when I thought about this. And I didn't want anger to be that thing. I didn't want give either of them a version of me that was out of control, that needed to be talked down, that could be reframed later as the problem. I wanted to be the person who walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water and left. That's who I was. That's who I stayed. I won't tell you that I'm fine, because fine is a word that does a lot of cover-up work and I'm not interested in that. I'll tell you that I'm okay in the ways that matter. I'm in a new apartment that I like. I'm working on a file at work that I find genuinely interesting. I talked to a therapist for about 4 months, which I'd recommend to anyone, and I learned some things about myself in the process that I'm still sitting with. I'll tell you that the hardest part isn't the loss of Ren. Or not only that, the hardest part is that I lost Dex too. The version of Dex I thought I knew. The one who showed up at 2 in the morning and remembered my coffee order. And I can't fully separate that grief from the anger, and some days I'm not sure I want to. Some days the anger is cleaner. But I also know this. I followed the thread. I stayed calm. I took my half of what was mine and I left the rest where it was. I didn't lie about what happened. I didn't burn anything down for the sake of burning it. And I don't need anyone who wasn't willing to say, I'm sorry this happened to you, in the first 60 seconds to be part of what comes next. That's not a threat, it's just a fact. Some doors close and you don't reopen them. Not out of anger. Not out of punishment. Just because the floor on the other side isn't solid anymore, and you've stopped pretending it is. I walked out of my own apartment on a Tuesday in February with my bag over my shoulder and I chose, in that moment, the kind of person I was going to be. I'm still choosing it, every day. And I think that's enough.